You're listening to Building a Creative Life. I'm Pam Vale, an artist and writer. This podcast is about the small, often overlooked ways creativity shows up in real life, in what we notice and in what we choose to respond to. Here you'll find conversations and reflections shaped by curiosity, not instruction. No expectations, nothing to master. Just room to pay attention and trust where that leads. Today I'm talking with Talor Stewart, an architect with over 25 years of experience and the author of Conscious Home Design, a book that's reached #1 in multiple countries for a reason. Taylor's work is grounded in the idea that our homes aren't neutral. They're shaping our creativity, our relationships, and even our sense of well-being, often in ways we don't consciously notice. In this conversation, we talk about how intentional design can support personal growth, why small changes matter more than big renovations, and how our environments can either drain us or quietly support us. Be sure to stay until the end, where I'll share a few reflections and takeaways that you can apply to your own space, no matter where you live or how much control you think you have. Well, welcome, Talor. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pam. Really glad to be here. From one creative soul to another, I'm really excited to dive into some sparkly discussions.
Me too, absolutely. And I think that you and I both share a very similar viewpoint on the importance of our home environment with our physical and mental well-being. So I'm really excited to talk about that and give some information to our audience about, how your home can support your creativity and your spirituality and all that wonderful stuff. But I would love it if you
Sure.
could start and tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Sure, yeah. Um, so, well, that's a big question. I don't know if anyone wants to hear my whole life story and from childhood and how I became an adult and an architect and all these things. It is maybe an interesting journey. Um, I guess I always knew I was going to be an architect. I just didn't know the word for it. It was even as a child. My earliest play, were geared towards placemaking and shaping space. When most of my peers, we'd play with action figures, whether they're boy dolls or girl dolls. We'd do stuff and they would want to have them have conversations, interactions, and go and do stuff, sort of socially oriented kind of um, play activities. I found that for my most enjoyable activities were setting the stage, creating the dollhouse or creating the roads and the forts and the buildings and the whole diorama, kind of thing. And once that was done, I actually got a lot of satisfaction just sitting back and taking in the scene. It's kind of like my job was to set the stage, and then it's your job to live happily ever after, kind of thing. And so that's the architect mindset, and it was always there, inherent in just my personality. So, um, yeah, so I ended up, it slowly developed over time. And I always knew that I would write a book. I wanted to add value to the world. I knew that I had a unique perspective that would be of interest to some people. So even in college, I was thinking about writing my book, but it took me actually 20 years to get a book to market. And if you'd asked me what my career trajectory or my life plan would look like, back at 25 years old, if you'd asked me what I thought it was going to be compared to today, now it's it turned out a little different than I had thought, maybe than I had, the calendar of life didn't conform to my to my youthful vision.
Yep.
But the truth is that it took 20 years of practice and experience for my ideas to gel into a very tight, coherent message and methodology that anyone, even if they have no plans to hire an architect, because most people won't, most people will do the best they can with the walls they have.
Mhm.
And so even, if you have no plan to renovate your home, or even if you're just renting, and you have no control over that, and all you can do is arrange your furnishings and decorations, there's still a valuable message. There's still actually a lot of enrichment that you can do if you're intentional about the way you decorate and curate your space. And so that's what conscious home design is about, the book and my work. It's about helping. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to build a brand new home to get the value of it. Of course, if we do, you can it's like a quantum leap, but just little 2% shifts that you can make in the home can play huge. Um, you can get huge dividends from that, especially over time. As it's like this snowball effect or the butterfly effect. The
Mm-hmm.
ripples go out and they can really compound. And so I want to just share that with people. Even if you're living in a rental apartment somewhere, there's things you can do that. And this is also very um, very uh, powerful that I want to share, is that this is not it's not about aesthetic style or preference. This isn't, because there's so many design books out there. Hey, this is my taste. Okay, if you like it, great. If you don't, move on to the next one. The principles that I bring up in conscious home design, in my book and in my work, in my practice, are rooted in science. I wanted to find things that are universally applicable for all humans, and we start there.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we have that, once we make sure that we've got those things taken care of and squared away, then on top of that, we build your aesthetic and your taste. But so it's not for me to say, hey, everyone needs to have blue walls or whatever, right? It's like, no, that's not. You're going to tell me what you like, but if the space doesn't work for you, then having them painted your favorite color isn't enough to overcome the challenges, the physical constraints that are there. So that's
Absolutely.
that's conscious home design in a
Ah,
nutshell, in
there's
my
so
work.
much in there. Oh my God. So, okay. So, I don't even know where to start. So, I guess you gave so many nuggets that I want to like talk about. So, I want
Sure.
to go back to like the action figure story.
Okay.
Because a lot of the people that I speak to are at the very beginning of their creative exploration or even just figuring out what they like. Like a lot of people don't even know, they have outside influences or have never explored what their own tastes, spirituality, needs, all of that are. And so I find it very fascinating. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this before about like that part in childhood before we are overly influenced, that there are different roles that we're drawn to. So I was like you, I'm not an architect, but I created the scene. I wanted to make the clothes for the dolls. I wanted to like, make furniture or do whatever. And like
Right.
it always felt wrong. Like it always kind of it felt true to me, but I always felt like, oh, I don't know how to do like that social part, Like I don't want to like pretend that they're talking. Like that's not fun for me. Fun for me is like picking out fabrics and like
Uh-huh.
creating the scene for somebody else to enjoy. And I am still like that to this day. So I think that's really important for people to hear that that's okay. Like you don't have to be one way or the other. And there are different roles that we play. So I love
Yeah.
that whole story. That is like, for me, that's gold for someone who's trying to figure out their creativity.
Oh, good. Good. Well, I'm happy I shared that bit of my story, just to, hey, if I'm like that, there's probably someone else that's like that too, and it's okay. We all have our own, natural inclinations and aptitudes. So maybe
Absolutely.
accept that at first, and then perhaps develop it and lean into it, as
Hmm.
step two.
And the other thing that I think is really valuable is your time frame. So talking about
Mm,
like in your early 20s,
yeah.
and your book taking 20 years, I think that's what you said, to come out, like we're a different person and our experiences are
Sure.
different. Obviously, your work experience and your life experience, there's a time frame for everything. And I find that creativity is not, there is no expiration date. It might not be on your, like what you think your time frame is going to be, but things happen when they're supposed to. So I think that's a
Right.
really beautiful lesson for people too. And I would love for these people that are sort of newer to this idea of living creatively and having your environment like inform or support your creativity. what are some of the things that you take into consideration when you're helping somebody design spaces for them?
Okay, okay, good. Um, so Pam, the most famous painting in the world, yeah, the Mona Lisa. So I find I love this example because it illustrates the deep um, truth of the matter of helping us become um, the best or the next version of ourselves that we want to, um, that we want to create, the life we want to create, the experiences we want to have, and what it feels like on the inside, but also what it looks like on the outside. So I was studying the Mona Lisa. It recently turned 500 years old. And I thought about that and I was like, wow, it has no eyebrows. And they were thinking, hey, he never finished the painting. But it turns out that there were eyebrows, but just over the centuries, the pigments faded out. And so, when they hit it with certain spectrum light photography, then they saw that the eyebrows had been there. So that's kind of interesting. But as I was learning more about the painting, Leonardo da Vinci, it took him more than 10 years to finish it. And some estimates say 15 to 17 years, but I'm just being conservative. It was at least a decade of working on it. And this really illustrates the concept that um, architecture is really responsible for all of our great human advancements, whether it's art, whether it's science, technology, medicine, just everything we do. Because if we didn't have the ability to control our environment and shape our space, then we wouldn't really be able to achieve anything that took longer than a sunny afternoon. Because as soon as the weather came or night came and animals or hostile neighbor tribes came, they'd mess everything up. And so the ability to dedicate space to human activities and endeavors exponentially accelerates and increases and reduces the friction of us, accomplishing those goals. If Leonardo da Vinci didn't have an art studio, then um, when he didn't have the inspiration or when he was busy on other paid projects that he had to do, he could put the Mona Lisa aside and keep it safe, and then when it was time, he could pull it out again and work on it a little bit more when he had inspiration or when he had a moment from other projects. And so one of the frameworks that I use with clients is say, if it's important to you, if you want to have this type of activity or experience in your life, you need to dedicate space to it. Seth Godin said it was like 10,000 hours. You need to have 10,000 hours to get mastery in something. And of course, that depends on what subject it is you're studying, but it's just a rule of thumb thing. And we all know, hey, practice makes perfect, right? It takes time and effort to become good at, or to become, even, adept at anything. Um, but what's missing from that common sense formula is that it also takes space. If you don't have the space, then if your art studio is your dining room, then every night you got to pack everything up and set the table for dinner. And then every day when you want to do it again, you got to unpack and reset the stage. And there's a lot of it's not only is it lost time, but it's also friction. And so when you can have space dedicated and your easel or your artwork or your creative things, whether it's pottery or anything, journaling, whatever you do for creative activity, playing music, if you have a dedicated space for it, then it just makes it so much easier to accomplish your goals. So um, that's sort of fundamental and foundational is if it's valuable to you, dedicate space somehow. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be rich and you have to have, like a huge home. Um, it's just how do we arrange the space that we already have? So yeah, that's what conscious home is. So I created a sort of a framework to because if I said, Pam, if you came to me and said, hey Taylor, I'm going to we're changing, we're upsizing, we're downsizing, we're relocating, whatever it is, it's time for a new home, can you help us design something? I say, sure, what do you want? Well, you've got your list, you have your list of the things you want. um, it's my job to look at that and evaluate it and ask the right questions and say, have you thought about this? Like specifically, what do you like to do for creative activity? Or what do you like to do for personal development, self-improvement stuff, what sort of love and relation, love and belonging and interpersonal connections do you like to have in your life? These are questions that most architects don't really ask, or if they ask them, they're very surface, sort of cursory, and there's not a framework. And so the conscious home design methodology was about leaving no stone unturned and making sure to ask the right questions, because the quality of your question determines the quality of your outcome and your results. And these are things that we know based on science help people feel um, fuller, richer, like they've had a happy uh, life. And so, yeah, there it is.
And so I guess that kind of leads into my next question, because I did a little bit of reading, about what you do, and I would love to know if you could talk about, in your experience and what you've learned in your profession, and um, how you work with your clients, what actually makes people happy as they age.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I'm
So
fascinated by that.
when I was writing the book, um, I was, I had about a 50 page Google Doc of all of my notes and my brainstorms and my, things that I had, old papers, concepts from college and everything, testimonials and just everything, links to scientific studies, just everything, a whole nebula of stuff. And I was researching for things, that were um, going to be really impactful, that actually would move the needle, you know, in people's life. And I came across the Harvard study of adult happiness, and it's the longest running study of its kind. It's still going on today. It started in 1938, so it's 88 years old now, or something like that. And they've studied thousands of individuals. They're on to multiple generations, because they've tracked people throughout their whole lives. And they wanted to know, who are these people, what are their backgrounds, and what does their life look like, just let's just see. And so um, they did this big giant intake form, their physical health, their best, did they come from money, did they come from poverty, what kind of house do they live in, what sort of expectations do they have in life, are that, what's their mental state, and the whole sort of a whole avatar snapshot. And they followed them throughout their whole life, and periodically would check in with them and sort of re-update and see how things changed. And what they found is that throughout the ups and downs of life, health challenges or career changes or business success or failure, or whatever, whether they lived in a nice fancy house, or if they had lived in a humble house even with no running water, like what what could they learn from the data, and see what impacts our happiness. And they found that the single biggest predictor, not only of our happiness, but actually of longevity, of people's life expectancy, was the quality of their relationships. And so, I think everybody intuitively says, oh, of course. Yeah, right. I know that. That's why I get up in the morning, to do it for my family. It's like why so motivating. Oh, of course, I do everything for my family. Or in my free time, I want to go hang out with my friends and family. It's all about relationships. Um, but once you have sort of data and math to prove it, what we sort of intuitively know, it gives us permission to prioritize it differently, in a sense, right? It's like it's no longer a wish list item, and it becomes, oh, this is like scientific first principles. It's like we are hardwired for this, and when we have this, we statistically do better, live longer, are happier. So as an architect, when I came across this, I thought, all right, how can I intentionally incorporate opportunities for relationships in the home? Because that's what makes us live longer and live happier. And so that's the highest aim of architecture. The highest aim is to help people live happily ever after. And so here's something that's, there's a scientific data behind it saying, hey, this is, do this, and if X, then Y. And so I started digging into this idea of relationships, because the Harvard study was very clear that relationship was not limited to a romantic partnership. You know, so if you're single, you know, you can still live a long, happy, fulfilled life. You know, if you don't end up pairing up with someone, most people do, but it's not a requirement. So I started to explore all these diverse kinds of relationships. And the Greeks, turns out they have 7 different words for love, depending on the type of love it is, whether it's from parent and child, or to friends, or whether it's from lovers, or whether it's from a person in their community. You know, they agape or storge or filial or eros, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that was interesting, but I still wanted more, you know, so I kept exploring and researching, and I found that all of our human relationships are going to fall into one of 3 sort of broad categories, and those are giving, receiving, and reciprocal. And so I thought, okay, great. So there it is. So we know that a full, well-rounded life is going to include some ratio, some recipe, you know, whatever balance is right for you, whether you're introverted or extroverted, or, you know, whatever your personality, you know, calls for, a, a, a ratio, a good balance of giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships. And so, what can I do as an architect to um, bake it into the mold, so to speak? The you know build into the bones of our homes opportunities for all 3 kinds of relationship. You know, every conscious home should have, you know, intentional opportunities for giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships. So that's because that moves the needle. You know, that's the thing that the single biggest impactor of our happiness and life expectancy.
And I think people, especially when we're talking about home design or, whether it's the structure or the decor,
Hmm.
I think that a lot of people don't think that deeply about it. Like they think about their taste
Sure.
or, the aesthetics. But I think
Yeah.
diving in, you talk about how your conscious home design or your integrative design can make people excel in other areas of their life. And I would assume that that kind of comes into this whole feeling as well, as far as what the outcome can be, as far
Hmm.
as supporting
Hmm.
your habits that you want. We're at the beginning of the
Sure.
year. People are making resolutions. People are wanting to make changes in their life, and can you talk a little bit about how your environment, whether it's starting from the ground up and building something new or working with what you have, how that can support your desires,
Hmm.
your habits, your rituals?
Yeah. Okay. So it's that's a you know that door opens to quite a big vista, you know, for us to explore. Um, I can start with sort of the why. You know, let's start with the why so that we can sort of get that 10,000 foot view over it, you know, and then we can get more granular and zoom in and say, you know, here's how. You know, once we know why, now here's how to do that and get specific. So every step that we take in the direction, even if it's tiny, you know, in the direction of our dreams, sets up sort of a positive feedback loop for ourselves. It mirrors back, you know, that life um, is possible. You know, that we have potential, that we can, uh, that life does can work for us. You know, if you feel like I want to be, you know, creative, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, but I can't because of these limitations, you know, then that's frustrating, obviously, you know, and it can, you know, if you can't resolve it, you know, somehow, then, you know, that can lead to, you know, in extreme cases, you know, depression and hopelessness, right? And so we don't, you know, obviously we don't want to spend much time there. We want to shape our environment in a way that it's always mirroring possibility back to us, because that's what keeps us hopeful and optimistic. So Winston Churchill said, "We shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us." So we want to shape them in a way that is going to support us. It's going to propel us, or at least open the doors to our goals, our hopes, and our dreams. You know, and so that's sort of like wisdom from the West, you know, wisdom of the Occident. But in the Orient, you know, we have the same principle. Yogananda said that environment is stronger than willpower. And when I first read that quote, a part of me sort of resisted, because I thought, oh, I don't want to hear that. I want to feel like I do have the willpower to, to overcome my challenges and my limitations, right? I don't want to feel helpless. So I really had to meditate with this and spend time, contemplating this sort of um, statement, that he presented, this sort of proof, or not proof, but this, he presented this, and I was like, oh, I have to challenge that or prove that or see what that means. And so, think about it. If you want to become, um, because it's a creative show, and we already touched on Leonardo da Vinci. If, for example, you wanted to become, a good painter, not just for yourself, but, in the marketplace, to be respected or to make, some money or, from your, if you want to be competitive in the marketplace as a creative person, as a painter, then if all day long you're hanging out with accountants, it's going to be really hard. But if all day long you have a studio and there's other creative people around you, and you're putting yourself in an environment of creativity, it may accelerate your progress. And so environment being stronger than willpower, there's a social component to that. The company you keep will in large part influence the direction that your life takes. But there's also a physical aspect to this as well. And just like a tree root will move a concrete sidewalk, you know, wood is softer than concrete, than cement, but that 24/7 constant slow pressure exerts an influence on it. And so at any given moment, the human will is so indomitable. We're so powerful. People are breaking records every day, and we have all sorts of stories, and we love these stories where people, faced a challenge and they reached down deep inside, and they found, the oomph to overcome, right? And so it's true that in any given moment we can overcome, but these are breach moments. Think about the whale that swims with everything it's got, and it launches itself out of the ocean. And we see it's very majestic, it's beautiful. Like, social media is full of breach moments. That's what we celebrate. But then what happens is gravity takes over, and it falls back in. We don't live in a state of 100% volume all the way up, activated all the time, right? It's like it's unsustainable. And so the times where we're going on habit or autopilot, or we're coasting through, or whatever, we're tired or whatever it is, that's the time when the environment starts to influence us. And so we just want to be intentional about the way we shape environment, so that when it is influencing us, whether we're aware of it or not, even subconsciously, it's influencing us. It's helpful in the way it does. So that's sort of the big sort of why, it's important to us, is to, keep our doors of potential and possibility open, and keep life hopeful and optimistic, even, again, even in tiny little 2% ways. How? What does that actually look like? So, going back to the relationships, because relationships is first, right? These other things, creative expression and um, personal development, these are things from Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, that we all have. And so we want to make sure we're touching on all points, not just satisfying our basic physical needs of, food and shelter and that kind of thing. That's housing evolved first as shelter, right? It's just protecting us from something. But now that we've achieved shelter, once you've done that, you want to take it to the next level and say, okay, how can it start to um, help me express or develop my higher needs, beyond the physical. And so, um, before we get into the nitty gritties of that, I stay with the relationships, because the math says that is more important, is the most important, or is the biggest factor. Yes, obviously we need the other things too, but if you're, living a creative lifestyle but you're so dang lonely, then that's not optimal, right? Whereas it may be better to feel really connected and have amazing, rich relationships and feel like, well, I'm not being as creative as I'd like to, but I think one is slightly more sustainable than the other. And so the relationships is slightly more valuable to us. We're social creatures, typically, even the introverts among us. We need a certain amount of feeling like we're not alone, and we're connected. So I like to, so I previously said a conscious home, your conscious home, even if it's an apartment, um, should have opportunities for all three categories of relationship: giving, receiving, and reciprocal. And I took that one step further in my book and in my practice. And I said, obviously certain rooms naturally lend themselves to a certain, you know, relationship, predominantly a certain category. But it's actually, what would it look like if every room in the house had opportunities for all three kinds intentionally? So not just the whole home, but every room was giving, receiving, and reciprocal. What would that look like? Is it even possible? And so it turns out, yes, it is. Yay. Can do it. And an example that I like to share with people, I like to talk about a room that is typically not thought of as a relationship building room, a room for relationships, and that is the bathroom. The bathroom is typically, a private space where we go to be alone, to get away, to take care of our body, do our business. Um, Maybe if you have young children that are clinging to your leg a lot and you just need 5 minutes of alone time,
Or pets.
the bathroom is a haven. Yeah. Or maybe if it's Thanksgiving and there's a big event happening, a bunch of people are there and someone starts talking politics. You're like, oh my God, I need to escape for a second. Let me just go and recenter and reconnect with my energy and make sure I'm on my own, solid on my feet, and then go back in. So the bathroom is a private space, but it's also extremely rich territory to um, feel, to strengthen your connections. And so um, examples of giving relationships are all the ones where we show up as the primary giver. And so those are going to be ones where we are the teacher or we are coaching or mentoring someone. Ones where if we're parenting, we're raising or teaching children, even plants and animals. If you have pets or plants or even a bird feeder outside, that's a giving relationship that you have. And everyone says, sure, you know, I I've talked to many people and they're referencing their pet and they're like, oh yes, I receive more than I give. All I do is and sure, that's true, but at face value, the first step is you giving. And so that's how we categorize it very simply. All relationships are going to have an element of give and take. That's just the nature of life. But um, but it's a giving relationship at first, and then our reciprocal relationships are ones like you and I are having right now, Pam, where it's two people, they're showing up on their own footing, and I don't have to, it's not like I'm talking with a child where I have to have a role model persona. I don't have to be on my best behavior and sort of model something for them. I can just sort of let my hair down and talk more from the heart and be more casual. And so relationships that we have with our peers, with colleagues, with friends, with our spouse or significant other, anything where there's sort of equal, exchange and give and take. Those are our reciprocal relationships. And then our receiving relationships are the ones where we are the beneficiary of someone else's care and wisdom and love. And so those are relationships that we have with our parents or elders and ancestors, with our heroes, we draw inspiration from, or spiritual figures for
Mhm.
guidance or strength. Um, Also, of course, with our teachers and mentors and coaches. Yeah. So anyone that wants the best for us or inspires us to stretch or reach a little bit into our potential, into our
Yeah.
possibility.
It's
Those.
a great, like, you make it so clear. I feel like when you said the words in the beginning, not to me, but to some people, they might seem sort of like aspirational or like, like buzzwords of what we should be thinking about or looking for. But your definitions make them attainable and they make sense and it's just so clear. And the, do you find when you do this with people, when you walk them through this or share this in your book, and I will put all your contact information in the show notes so people can find your book, find your workbook.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's so accessible
Thanks.
and useful. But do you find that people have ever thought about this at this level? Like,
Um, Not usually. I
mm,
think, if you look at the founding fathers, they wrote the Declaration of Independence. They said, we accept it as, self-evident and a universal right that we have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it's sort of like this, the United States is sort of like this free for all. It's like, hey, within the bounds of what's legal, go be happy, and it's very haphazard. It's left up to chance to what that means and what that looks like for people. It's a big experiment. And I wanted to create a framework that could be like a guidepost. You can just take a handful of seeds and chuck them out in the yard, and they may grow, and you'll get some tomatoes and some cucumbers and things. But if you actually till the soil and mulch and water and cultivate, and put some stakes, for support to grow on and do some pruning, then the harvest is going to be 10 times, what it is. And so um, when we cultivate our life with the same intentions, once you know the things to do, plant stakes, do watering, certain amount of weeding and pruning, I wanted to create the actual steps that we could more easily or readily or more bountifully, enrich ourselves and get to that happiness, and the built environment, we spend half of our lives in our homes, so it really makes a difference.
some
Like
people
that's
more now with remote working and since COVID and all of that. I mean,
totally. Some people are spending 80% of their life in their
yeah,
home, right? And so
absolutely.
you want to that's the place to start. Again, going back to environment, shaping our experience. And so if we cultivate that intentionally, we do it. So, think I mentioned Seth Godin before, the 10,000 hours. Most people don't spend 10,000 hours thinking about, home design, right? And so we accelerate our progress when we consult with experts, right? Like, hey, if I am having health challenges, I'm going to check in with a doctor, right? So most people have not thought as deeply about it as I have, because I've spent, much more than 10,000 hours. I mean, I had already put in 10,000 hours before I finished college in this
Mm.
in this thing, and so I don't know how many hours I've put in, tens of thousands of hours, into my profession. So, you know, if you so most people haven't thought that deeply about it, and so that's why it's beneficial to pick my brain, because then I can help you say, hey, have you thought about this? Oh, what about this? And then they come to me and say, oh, I want to do this. I'm like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. Here's a way to implement that very effectively, kind of thing. So yeah, um, conscious home design meets you where you are. And so people will go through. So what I encourage people to do, and what we do in the workbook, is we just do a self-assessment. Go through your home, look room by room, look for relationships, identify the relationships you have, and see if they're giving, receiving, or reciprocal, and see if there's any gaps. And if there are gaps, do you are you okay with that, or do you want to make a change, and do little shifts? And so it's really just about finding what's going to be valuable to you, and if you have all your relationships dialed in, then it's going through the 9 essential spaces worksheets, which are basically tied right back to Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Still, even though we've learned all so much about the science of human happiness and excellence, architecture has really only evolved with style and technology. We're still building, a house is still X many bedrooms with a kitchen, a living room, and a bathroom, and a garage, a garage big enough for that many cars. We're still building houses the way we did in the 1900s. They haven't evolved, from the program, from the floor plans. So I'm trying to say, hey, we satisfy our physical needs, and we have a little bit of social interaction through our family room or our living room, and maybe we have a little bit of personal development opportunity in an office, maybe, but it's just haphazard, and again, going back to dedicating space accelerates your success. Let's look at those things. And so it's just the framework of walking through um, all of those things. So we start with the relationships, and then we move on to the other things, personal development, physical exercise, creative expression, et cetera, et cetera. So um, yeah, so that's sort of how it works. And if I'd like to keep tying back to the bathroom example. So, because I talked about, three relationships, the giving, receiving, and reciprocal, in the bathroom. But what does that actually look like? And how could someone listening, actually start to implement that, in their home? So, in the bathroom, examples of giving relationship, if you happen to have an outside window in your bathroom, then why not put a plant or two, on the windowsill or on a little shelf. If there's no room on the sill, then a little shelf, nearby, so the plants can get some light, or hang them from the top of the window. If you don't have a window in your bathroom, then put in a full spectrum light bulb. And there are many plants that can do just fine with that. Obviously you're not going to be growing bananas, or mangoes, but find a shade tolerant plant, and give it a full spectrum light bulb, and you'll be just fine, And this does a couple of things. It not only does it start cultivating a giving relationship, and it's low maintenance. I mean, once a week, take 3 steps from the sink, give it some water, prune off a dead leaf. It's it's not gonna wreck your schedule caring for a plant in the bathroom. But it does, um, in addition to cultivating the giving relationship, it gets you out of yourself. It gets you thinking life is a little bit bigger than just me. Because we go into the bathroom and the mind's racing. I'll be brushing my teeth. I'll be thinking about emails I need to compose, or something
Mhm.
I'm already doing my to-do list for the day. My mind
Yeah.
is elsewhere, because I know how to
Or
brush my
bringing your
teeth.
to-do list in the bathroom with you, which most people do, like
Sure, right,
bring the
right. We
actual device.
multitask, right?
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. However, we can also just take 3 seconds, 5 seconds of that time we're in there to just have a mindful moment and say, connection, and that, what does that do to our experience of feeling like we're showing up in our, more present, and what ripple effects does that send out into life, and again, compounding over time, right? So um, but physiologically, when we see green growing things, it actually helps calm the mind and our breath. We breathe more deeply instead of more shallow. Our heart rate might slow, and our blood pressure can actually decrease. And so this is universal. The bathroom. You could have the most beautifully decorated space, architecturally, and if you put 1,000 people in there, they're not all going to have the same response. Some people are going to like it, some people aren't. Generally, there are ways we can design it that will reduce. We can see the brain waves that will reduce the alpha, waves, and those will subside, and you can see theta waves, and creativity start to go. So what we see in our environment does affect the mind this way, but it's not always universal, because there's aesthetic appeal. It's personal preference. Oh, I like green. Oh, I like blue. But it's universally true that when you show human beings green growing things, they have these physiological things because our bodies evolved in nature, and so we didn't evolve in boxes and buildings. And so when we're in a space that's devoid of nature,
Mm.
the body at some deep, you know, DNA level, it feels out of place. And so that's it's mildly stressful for the body. But when you show a bunch of green growing things, the body says, "Oh, I'm in my natural habitat," and there's a relaxing, there's an easing that happens. And so it's working on multiple levels. It's a win-win when you have, you've
Yep.
taken a dead space, a utilitarian space, and you've taken one step towards making a garden or an oasis.
It's interesting because over the course of since I started this podcast, and I speak mostly to creatives in all different
Yeah.
fields. You're the first architect I've spoken to. Um, Literally everyone has said that the way they refuel or the way they de-stress or the way they um, uh, spark their creativity is getting in nature. So it's just it
Uh,
shows you that it's not you can do it yourself. Like you don't have to go outside. You don't have to like a forest near you to walk through. Well, that's great and I love that.
sure.
You could
Yeah.
just put a plant in your bathroom or your bedroom or
Yeah.
wherever. You know, it's
Hmm.
really important, and I think that
Yeah.
it's this universal thread that obviously you come from more of a science background as far as your research on this, and it shows you that it's real. It's not imagined.
Yeah. Right. I wanted, it's important to to start from the place of science because then we know it's true and we can again prioritize it. And like I said, at the beginning, you can, if the space doesn't work for you, it doesn't matter. It's like you may love a certain pair of shoes or an outfit, and it may look incredible. It may be from the top designer in the world, but if it's two sizes too small or two sizes too large, the enjoyment of that is not going to be so great, right? So it has to fit you. So start with the fit and then start with the style. That's the whole crux of the matter. So taking it one step further, what about putting a little fishbowl in the bathroom? And so you have a goldfish, or a betta fish with the nice fins, And so you come in the morning and, oh, hi fish. You sprinkle a little food on it, and there it is. It's so easy, but there's a spark of joy and happiness. There's life in your bathroom, yes. So those are some giving relationships, and then reciprocal relationships, we see this a lot in master bathrooms. We have two sinks, side by side, so you can brush your teeth, or wash your face, with someone. And if you have the space and if you desire this for your lifestyle, why not have a big tub, for a soaking tub big enough for two people? It can be very, very romantic and certainly relaxing, and health benefits of soaking in a tub. Um, and just for efficiency's sake, you can have a shower with two heads, so you don't have to take turns. You can do it simultaneously. It's more efficient, but it's not sexy time. It's just showering. But it's proximity, being
Connection.
together. So if you desire it, these are opportunities for reciprocal relationships in the bathroom, and for receiving relationships. I think everyone can take a photo of someone that they know loves them, and or someone, even a spiritual figure where they're receiving, some sort of deep personal meaning or value, and put that image up, um, and just take a moment, in the morning when you're at the sink. Just again, do your to-do list, but just take 3 seconds or 5 seconds and just gaze at that and say, you know what? There is care for me. There is someone who wants the best for me, or there is someone that inspires me and makes me want to grow. And so, how will you show up differently in your life, in your days, with when you start from that place, or will you sleep? How will you sleep differently if that's the last thing you see at night? Is that reminder, mindfully, mind you, because just putting it up there, the thing is the brain, we become habituated to our environment. The brain is cued to notice things that are different. And so if the picture is there, after a few weeks, you'll start to tune it out because your brain says, I know that that's there. I don't have to pay attention to it. My survival isn't at stake. And so we become normalized to our environment, and so That's why it takes, so just putting it up there isn't going to change your life. But if you put it up there and take a moment to notice it intentionally, that's the secret sauce. That's what turbocharges. That's the alchemy of the mind body environment connection. You can put it to work consciously, intentionally for yourself. And so if you're like, hey, I'm Catholic and my partner's Jewish and we don't want a picture of Jesus up there, it's okay, fine. No problem. Just take a quote, something more
Mm,
subtle, that's
yeah.
not as prominent, and reflect on that. A quote from someone that inspires you, can go up there. Um, so yeah, so that's, and then you can take those same kind of concepts and just go through every room of the house and say, hey, here's some relationships, here are opportunities for that. And so it just all goes back into building that upward spiral, the positive feedback loop. The life is working for me. I'm connected. There's possibility and potential.
And
And
I
you
feel
just
like
see how
also
that
having some control over it, like having some, like a part in it. It's part, you're creating it for yourself, which I think is really important.
when we can shape our space, we're taking our destiny into our own hands. The ability to create your space is the power to create your future.
That's
100%.
beautiful. That's beautiful. And I feel like a lot of people, especially the people that I talk to, like I said, are sort of at the beginning stages of that. And they're trying to, I don't know, like find trust in their own what lights them up, or trying to orient themselves to facing a little bit more inward to what matters to them. And I
Yeah.
wondered if you could just share a little bit about your experience working with people that maybe don't either a don't know what they like, they have never
Yeah.
explored that, or
Hmm.
don't have the confidence or the trust to put that forward in something, also something as
Great.
big as like their home.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. It's so juicy, Pam. So the Conscious Home Design book, I wrote it to be accessible. I wrote it. Nobody wants to read a big. It's not supposed to be for architecture students. I'm not trying to teach people how to be an architect. You don't need to know everything I know. There's so much. It's such a deep and broad field. I just wanted to very easily and accessibly, you can read it in an hour, just hit some main points that, a non-designer could really understand and be like, aha, that makes sense. I get it. And then I hired someone who has a dual master's degree, first in psychology and therapy. It works as a therapist, as a counselor, but also masters of social work, and so has this sort of very specific, nitty gritty one-on-one, but also this sort of general overview kind of a thing of society. And so um, I had this person read my book, and then together we said, hey, these are the principles. How can we help people, put them to work for themselves, And so remember what I mentioned, the quality of your question determines the quality of your results. So she and I worked together to ask the good questions. And so it's really just we just ask the questions. Hey, fill it out. Maybe you haven't thought about it, but now you are. Now we're saying, hey, what do you think about this? What do you want to do? What does that look like for you? Imagine it. And so you touched specifically on creativity. And so in the workbook and right now on this interview on this podcast with together with you, I'll share that we touched on already before. If you're feeling like your creative spark has been sort of moldered out and snuffed and you can't find it, you're not sure what is, maybe it was never nurtured very well to begin with, and you're searching, the clues are in your childhood. Look back to when you were, as early as 5 years old. But there's also some people don't have very many clear, vivid memories from that age. But your tween years, 10, 11, 12, are extremely, most people can remember those pretty well. And they're also, the brain and the personality have developed a lot more, in terms of our sophistication. And so the types of play and games and things that we do show up in a more developed way compared to a preschooler or a kindergartner. And so looking at what types of things you like to do as a tween, um, go with that. You know, that's a great place to dive into what you naturally gravitated towards. Of course, environment, you know, the people you hung out with and opportunities may have not allowed you to cultivate certain things,
Mm.
but a clue should have shown up. You might have wrote about it in a diary or just, you know, had a conversation with an uncle or someone, you know, a grandmother, you know, that was like, oh, you know, there may be a clue to something that you naturally, a direction you wanted to go in, even if it didn't um, take root and
Yeah.
flourish. You know, there
Maybe
may
a
be a clue
subject
back
in
there.
school or something, a class that you had in school that you were drawn to.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
A class or a conversation with the school guidance counselor, you know, about what would you like to do, you know, and what classes do you want to take when you get into out of middle school, when you get into high school next year, kind of thing. Sure, there's clues that could come from any number of places. But here's the other thing is it, even we're always creating ourselves new. And so it may not even matter back there because also the questions I say is, look, you may have enjoyed playing cello in the past, but that doesn't mean you have to enjoy it today. You know, what would you like to do? If you don't have a memory or a strong feeling, then invent something. Just say,
Mm.
hey, I want to try this. And it doesn't have to be a commitment like, hey, I'm going to build a house. Like, I want to try playing music. And so I'm going to build a music studio with soundproof rooms. You don't have to go and do all that. You don't have to make a big commitment. It's just like, let me just try some online classes or something and do this thing. And you can always change your mind, you know, but having a space dedicated to a certain activity, you know, and building it into your structure, into your routine, carving out time, you know, whether it's 5 minutes a day or 30 minutes once a week or whatever it is, you know, just give yourself time to explore things and create. So you don't have to um, stay in the past. You can rekindle something from the past, but you don't have to. You can certainly just choose to create something new. Hey, I think I want to do this, and just try it. It's just
Right.
life. It's an experiment. And
Definitely.
so I actually say that in the workbook. You know, those are things. It's like, hey, great. You know,
Yeah.
and we do the same thing like even with it with your kitchen. It's like, okay, how many meals per day or per week do you actually want to make? Are you doing things very quick like throwing together a smoothie or a green juice or 5 minute quick meals, or are you taking time to, you know, spending an hour and a half from scratch, you know, all raw ingredients, assembling things, you know, what does that look like? It may look like this right now, but what would you like to that to look like in the future? And so you can create your future. You know, we're always reinventing ourselves. You have the opportunity to shape your future and say, okay, well, let's look at how that would look in a kitchen if you wanted that type of routine. You know, again, it's the opportunity to shape your shape your future. So it's not about building, you know, what was or who you were. It's about building who you will be and building the future, something that's adaptable, something that evolves with you. You know, that's the that's conscious home design.
And that's perfect. I mean, I think that's like, that kind of sums it up all right there. And I think that, how you emphasize that it's personal and it doesn't have to look like anybody else's, and that there's
Right.
scientific data to back certain things to help support you making decisions. I think it's wonderful. I'm excited for people to check out your book. I'm excited that you have a really simple resource that's it's so valuable because, like you said, like we've talked about pretty much through this whole podcast, how much time we spend in our homes and how important that is to our daily happiness and our success, both personally and professionally. The fact that your workbook is simple. It's not going to be something that's going to take like weeks for somebody to fill out and
Yeah.
stress over. It's really accessible.
Thanks. Mark Twain apparently was wrote a letter to a friend, and he was joking. He said, "I would have wrote a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time." And I
Exactly.
spent a lot of time to condense it to
Mm,
be just so quick and easy, but so powerfully effective. You know,
absolutely.
I didn't want people to have to slog through a thing that's going to take them a month. I was like, nope, you can do this on a Saturday afternoon. Go through. It'll be thoughtful, it'll be fun, it's
Mm.
creative. And so yeah, um, I guess people could get a copy. It's you can get a physical copy or
Mhm.
a digital copy on my. You can order the copy of the book through your favorite local bookstore or online retailer, or you can get it at my website, conscioushomedesign.com. The workbook, however, is only available on my website. So, and there's a bundle. You can get the book, the audio book, and the workbook. I think it's $47 for
Mm.
instant download of all three of those things. Um, and if you want a physical copy, it's a bit more, but I'll sign it and mail it to you. But you'll also get the digital copy as well. And that I think I also have it set up to the bundle includes a consultation, so you can either before or after you do the workbook, you can pick my brain and talk with me about what that could look like for you, or how ways to implement stuff. So yeah, conscioushomedesign.com. And there's also a
Perfect.
contact me form there if someone just has a question for me, they want to reach out. I'm certainly open to that too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll put it all in the show notes too. I'll put the links in there. Is there anything else that you want to add that we didn't cover?
Um, I think if I was gonna just leave people with a big takeaway, it's that life is um, chaotic and challenging, um, but there is possibility and potential for you. There is love available to us, and I would like everyone to, focus on those relationships, the giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships, and see if there's ways, little things they can do, maybe an image they can put somewhere, or maybe, set up a little place with two chairs, or, just identify those things in their home and see what, and just make those little shifts and see what it does. See how that changes things, your sense, your feeling of being in the world. How does that change? And then from there, you know see what's possible next. That's the big takeaway.
Oh, well, thank you, Taylor. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your research and your expertise. And I hope people will reach out to you and will enjoy your book and your workbook. And I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
My pleasure, Pam. Thank you for having me.
As I'm sitting with this conversation, what keeps coming back to me is how gently radical Taylor's approach really is. There's nothing flashy or intimidating about it. It's not about perfect homes or aspirational spaces. It's about paying attention. One of the things that stood out to me most is the idea that our environment is always in conversation with us. Whether we realize it or not, our spaces are reinforcing habits, emotional states, and even the way we relate to other people. And what I appreciate about Taylor's work is that it brings this awareness down to a very human level. This isn't about architecture as status, it's about architecture as care. We talk a lot about relationships in this episode, and I found that grounding. The idea that our spaces can support giving and receiving and reciprocity feels especially important right now. Creativity doesn't happen in isolation, even when it feels solitary. I also keep thinking about how accessible this all is. Taylor made it clear that conscious home design isn't reserved for people building new houses or doing major renovations. It's about noticing light, movement, nature, and flow. It's about asking simple questions like, where do I feel most myself? And where do I feel tense? Where do I naturally slow down? If there's one thing I'd invite you to carry with you from this conversation, it's curiosity, not judgment and not urgency, just curiosity. Maybe you notice one corner of your home this week, or how a certain room makes you feel when you walk into it, or what space might be asking for something next. Your home doesn't need to be fixed, and it doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to support the life you're actually living and the person you're becoming. Thanks for spending time with me, and I'll see you in the next conversation. Thank you for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stays with you in a quiet way. If this episode felt meaningful, you're welcome to follow the podcast or pass it along to someone who might enjoy it. Until next time.